Joining us now from North Carolina. He represents the 3rd District. Got to have him on my show every week because he's the king of candor. He tells you like it is, minces no words. That's what we need in America. People who tell you the truth, whether you agree with them or not. You got to get the facts out. No fake news here from Walter Jones. Represents the 3rd District of North Carolina, one of the most beautiful districts in the country, all the way from Ocracoke Island, which we visited last year for a baseball tournament. Turned out to be my favorite tournament and vacation of all time. And if you get a chance to go to Ocracoke this summer, do it. You drive from Chesapeake, I don't remember, 4 hours, maybe 5. I don't remember. All I know is it was a beautiful drive. But once we got on the ferry to go to Ocracoke, and we have a lot of stress in our life, okay? But halfway there, ferry was an hour maybe. Halfway on the ferry, stress was gone. It was just gone. It was like you were leaving it all behind for a respite. And by the time we got there, got off the boat, checked into our hotel there, and went to the beach, a whole different story. So I would encourage anybody to do that. Joining us now, Republican, 3rd District, North Carolina, Walter Jones. Congressman, great to have you, man.
Well, John, thank you. And really, your description of Ocracoke was probably as good as I've ever heard, and I can promise you, you told the people the truth. That's for sure.
I'm telling you, it's that ferry ride that gets you there, and it leaves everything behind. And so it's almost like it's a freeing experience. And just the wind's blowing, and just a fabulous opportunity, and not overpriced either. I mean, that was the other thing. We went to a baseball tournament there, but not overpriced at all. Man, lots to talk about since we saw each other a week ago. Every week, Congressman, there's so much stuff. Like, I can't wait to get you on. Okay, so let's start with Swamponomics.
Well, I don't know anymore.
It's every week.
John, I've been in the district. I've done a couple of meetings with a group of 10, 15 people, meaning it had a little speech, and I don't know what to tell people anymore. What happened to the Republican Party that I joined in 1992, who said we believe in less government and less spending? I think it's gone. I don't know where it is anymore. The party that I believe would try to hold down the growth of government, we're just as aggressive as the other party. Really
Swamponomics
replacing. Last week, I had to be home. I think I told you my wife had surgery last Tuesday. She's doing fine now, recovering. But I would have been with my friends up there and voted no. I mean, I've never voted to raise the debt ceiling since the late 90s.
Not only the debts, I mean, it's $1.3 trillion. This thing was a hodgepodge of every lobby. I mean, first of all, I thought we got rid of earmarks, but now what they do instead of earmarks, they just, in order to get votes from Democrats, they kept dumping stuff in it, because the way it is, just reality of it is, the total budget for the United States, the amount of money we're going to spend is about $4.3 trillion in between October 1st, 17 and September 30, 18. So the country's going to spend $4.3 trillion. $3 trillion is entitlements. I mean, they don't change. You can't do anything about it. What they passed was the discretionary spending, defense and other things. So that gives you $4.3 trillion. The estimates, the best estimates we have of revenue coming in is $3.3 trillion, which means you have another $1 trillion of deficit financing from 17 to 18. You've already got a $20 trillion debt. Add another trillion, it's $21 trillion. And there's no end in sight. Where does this end?
John,
ends in what? Calamity.
I know you've been a strong advocate of bringing some sanity to the spending in Washington, and there are those of us in Virginia and North Carolina across the nation that join you in that effort. I don't know what it's going to take to get the American people to understand. I spoke yesterday to about 50 kids at a high school, Washington, North Carolina, great kids at the advanced class and everything, and they had great questions. I always talk about the debt. I know to a 17, 16, 17-year-old young person, it doesn't mean quite what it does to people our age. But I have to lay it out there. I have to tell them, this is your future that we're squandering in Washington, D.C. And if you were teachers, and there were about 4 of them in there, I said, let the students pick one student every month, the beginning of the month, report to your class what the debt is at the beginning of the month. Let the same student come at the end of the month and tell them how much the debt went up, and then rotate it. I said, the young people, I know they rallied in Washington a week ago. I would like to see young and old rally about the growing deficit and debt. I realize it's not the same issue. I fully understand that. But to your point, and I'll close in 1 second, if we don't start dealing with this thing, I hate to say it, but I have a feeling the same thing will happen in the end of September, and Mr. Trump will sign the bill too. We're just continuing
he says
to
he's
go
not
down
going to
this
sign
road till
another
we
one.
collapse.
But he says he's not going to sign another one. But what you just pointed out is true, because this is going to run out again at September 30th, and we're going to go through the same thing. Continuing resolutions for 6 months, a last-minute budget that 8 people write. Nobody sees it until the final hour. 2,200 pages. It's all gobbledygook, and it's additional deficit spending. Everybody gets the money they want for their lobbyists that then donate back to their campaign, so they get reelected. And then they're going to give it to the president with 9 hours. And the alternative is you shut the government down just before the midterms, which he's not going to do. So, I mean, it's the same thing, right? You're right. It's the same thing. Same thing is going to happen again.
John, at some point in time, it will impact the economy. That will wake the American people up. When they start seeing the fact that the economy is so shaky, it looks like an earthquake has hit America. Then they're going to wake up and say to the American people, to the Congress and the president, stop this spending with no money in the bank.
You got 2 things that have to concern everybody, even as the economy is booming along. One is, we know that interest rates have been artificially held down because of slow economic growth. Every time they go up, right, the amount that we have to service the debt goes up. That's number one. Secondly, I mean, this is all dependent on foreign governments buying our debt, right? Like, we just have to borrow. Let me just give an example. Just yesterday or this week, we have to borrow $300 billion. So this week, the U.S. government is spending $300 more billion this week of March 26th, 18, than we are taking in. And, of course, we have no money in the bank. There's no rainy day fund. So we have to go and finance. We have to borrow this $300 billion. And where do we do that? Well, we don't go to Goldman Sachs, right? You go to foreign countries that have the cash. And who's got the cash? China. Why do they have the cash? Because we have a trade surplus with them of $550 billion, right? So they have the cash to buy the debt bonds that then gives us the money to pay everybody. Well, what if one day China says, you know what, I'm just not interested? And then we go to Germany and they said, we don't have the cash. I mean, all of a sudden you end up like Greece, right? When you can't sell the bonds. I mean, that's
very, very well. That's where we're headed. And I know there are other members of Congress that feel the way I do and you do. And at some point in time, I have a great cartoon. I'll see if I can get Allison to find it and send it to you, where Uncle Sam is standing on a mountain and he yells out, "I can see Greece from here." It's a sad commentary, but it's a cartoon.
That's right. That was like Sarah Palin saying that she's a foreign policy because she can see Moscow or something from her porch. But, I mean, and look, I am backing the president on all of his policies, as you know, and I'm certainly a protectionist, and I love the tariffs on China to get him to the table. But I also deal in reality. I mean, it's the countries that have the trade surplus with us that have the cash to fund our debt. If all of those surpluses went away, again, I just want everybody to grasp. This week, the government had to sell, the federal government had to sell $300 billion in bonds in order to pay its bills. That's what they had to raise, which then they carry the bond. That's additional debt. But they got to get buyers for that, right?
Well,
you got to get a buyer or you're not going to get the $300 billion.
The Chinese don't want to lose any money. But let me ask you, when you are a country wanting to negotiate, let's say with the Chinese, and the Chinese negotiators, looking at the American negotiators, in their mind, I can see this happening. You want to do what? You owe us money. We might crash your economy. I don't know why the American leadership does not understand that the more we borrow, the weaker we become in the eyes of our adversaries.
Well, that is one of the issues that we have to deal with. Now, the president is banking on 4.5%, over 4% growth. And if he gets that in the economy and we continue to add jobs and businesses and add to the tax base, that $1 trillion deficit can get cut. If the economy were to grow at 5%, for instance, it could get cut in half because you would generate the additional revenue. But that's you're betting on the come, right? You go with where we are now, it's going to be another $1 trillion. And if you do that for a decade, now you got a $30 trillion debt. And then as the interest rates go up, which they have to, then you're paying a higher percentage of the money you're paying out is going to service the debt you already have, right? Because it's not going to pay for anything. It's like you get your credit card in the mail, you got to pay, you owe $700 on merchandise, and then you owe $150 in interest. Well, if all you do is to pay the $150, you still owe the $700. So that's kind of the way it is.
Well, John, I'll tell you the truth. I think we're paying, last time I checked, roughly $1 billion a day to pay the interest on the debt. I mean, that, not to belabor this conversation, but it is a situation that we need the kind of leadership to say we're going to have tough love for a couple of years just to get a handle on the problem.
I think that if we could get to the point, Congressman Jones, where just one budget that we did or one cycle was balanced, where we didn't increase it, I think everybody would cheer, but that would just be a start where it didn't keep adding to the debt, the national debt that we have. All right, we're with Congressman Walter Jones. He's a Republican, 3rd District, North Carolina. That's the Outer Banks area from Ocracoke Island all the way up to Chesapeake, all points in between, Elizabeth City, all that good stuff. John Bolton, warmonger, neocon, extraordinaire, never met a war he didn't like. He wants to bomb everybody he meets. I'm being facetious. But here's fact. He defended all the Iraq wars, the Afghanistan war. He's defended them all. He ends up as National Security Advisor. What do you make of it?
Well, I'm like you and Rand Paul and a long list of people. I think it is a horrible recommendation. I am surprised that a president who criticized the Iraq war, who also sworn into office, said that he would not increase the number of troops in Afghanistan. I just think this is a bad decision. I know he is a capable man, talking about Bolton, but my God, his philosophy on world power is something that I am very concerned about.
John Bolton is the worst decision the president's made since he's been there, probably since Reince Priebus. I thought that was a disaster. He's right up there. The president campaigned on getting out of these wars, and we're kind of doing the opposite. Let's get to the Second Amendment. John Paul Stevens, former justice, saying that the culmination of these protests should be in repealing the Second Amendment, that it's antiquated and outdated. Were you surprised by that?
I was surprised and disappointed that a man who has been on the Supreme Court would make such a statement. And I think it's just sends a bad signal out because, the Second Amendment has been, no matter how you feel about the issue, that can be debated, and it will be debated. But, by God, we have a Constitution.